What everyone recognizes, minimalist or maximalist, is really the greatest discovery in the 20th century. It's the Dead Sea Scrolls. And in particular, well, if you were to ask me, okay, give me one book of the Old Testament that I'd like to have for again, verification of Old Testament history, and in particular of the Old Testament message of salvation and so on, what would that be? Well, it would be either it would be what we found, the book of Isaiah. I would also like to find the book of Deuteronomy from about 1000 BC myself, but nevertheless, this is good enough. This is Isaiah. This is all right. And what's incredible is we found the whole thing in one piece. In fact, the leather that was so good that the Bedouin shepherds that first recovered it almost made it into shoes. Okay, and then they said, well, let's see if we can sell it off as something, and they got $20 for it or something like that. But the thing that's incredible, again, is the book of Isaiah, and the content in the book of Isaiah here, the accuracy is incredible, because the next closest copy of the book of Isaiah that we had was from 1010 AD. And this thing dates back to 150 BC. So we have accurate copying here over 1,000-year period, where if you look at Isaiah 53 in particular, there's only 17 letters different between the Masoretic text that we have in 1000 AD that scholars had been working with and this Dead Sea Scroll. 10 spelling differences, different ways that you might write vowels. All the words are the same in terms of what you'd recognize. The biggest surprise is there's noon, the word for light, is in verse 11, but that doesn't really affect any meaning in any significant way at all. Again, when they carbon dated this, again, 1,100 years younger, older than our copy of Isaiah 53 that we have preserved through the rabbis. Again, with that accuracy of copying over 1,000 years is just stunning. What's particularly cool with Isaiah 53 is that's a fairly hot text for Jews and Christians to look at. And here we have one that's from long before the time of Christianity being around. And again, at least 150 years or so. And Isaiah 53, to me, is one of the most cool passages to look at, because this is where Isaiah talks about the suffering servant. And if you've heard Handel's Messiah and so on, you can probably sing this, but this is basically talking about this person, or is this the nation Israel? Who is this who's despised and shunned by men, who bore our sickness, who endured our suffering, who was wounded because of our sins, and by his bruises we were healed. So Isaiah is speaking of we being healed by what the suffering that this servant undergoes. It says that the Lord visited upon him the guilt of all of us, and that he was cut off. This is what's stunning with the passage. He's cut off out of the land of the living. That he's killed through the sin of my people who deserve the punishment. So you have substitutionary atonement showing up here. Somehow the suffering servant is killed. Why? Well, wow. He makes himself an offering for guilt, and yet he sees offspring and has a long life, so that through him the Lord's purpose might prosper. And this servant is a righteous servant, even though he suffered, and he makes the many righteous, and he bears their punishment. Again, this is the clearest statement of the substitutionary atonement in the Old Testament, is here in Isaiah 53. And then God says, I will give him the many as his portion. He'll receive the multitude as his spoil. For he exposed himself to death and was numbered among the sinners. And what's cool is this is how the Jewish Publication Society translates Isaiah 53. Okay? And you go, wow, okay, who is Isaiah talking about here? Who possibly in Jewish history could possibly have done anything like that? And it's like, oh yeah, gee, who was this suffering servant? And the incredible thing is Isaiah is talking about Jesus coming, this is a prophecy 700 years before Jesus actually came. And in particular, we have a direct copy of that prophecy from well over a century before Jesus actually came. So we know that prophecy was not tampered with by Christians or tweaked by Jews to make it less strong. It's very clear what the suffering servant will do, and very clearly looks like what Jesus did as well. So again, it's just an incredible thing to see that confirmation of what exactly the suffering servant would do confirmed long before Jesus actually came.